Hey guys, it's Mrs. Anglade, and tonight's lesson is going to talk to you about how do you know when a fraction is equal to 1/2, and most importantly, how do you know when a fraction is smaller than 1/2, and how do you know when it's bigger than 1/2, and that is going to be such an important skill for you to know when it comes to comparing fractions. But before we do that, I feel like we might need to go back and we might just need to make sure that we have things caught up in your equivalence chart, both equivalence charts, so that those aren't hanging out there blank. Okay, so let's go to that first one that we first started the other night. And the areas that I've done in red were the things that we have probably talked about in the past few days, but maybe I didn't specifically tell you to go ahead and put that in your journal. So let's make sure that it gets in there. I've added the percentages for 1/3 and 2/3, and that I know that they are also equal to 2/6 and 4/6. You should have learned that at teacher table today. We also learned about the fifths, that 2/5 and the 4/5 is 40% and 80% respectively, and that it's also equal to, I forgot to put 80 hundredths here. This is also equal to 80 hundredths, right? These are all equivalent. It's all about how many equal pieces they're cut up into, and then taking 4/5 of it, 80 out of 100. All right, so today, 1/6, you learned about the sixth today at teacher table. And I know that those were hard and difficult to understand, but what we wanted you to learn is that 1/6 is half of 1/3. So if 1/6 is half of 1/3, isn't 2/6, we already have that up here, 2/6 the same as 1/3? So I put, two of those together. If I put 3/6 together, oh my goodness, look what happened there, boys and girls. Here's my 3/6, right? And then my 4/6 is 2/3. Hey, I already know a lot of these fractions. The one that we did not know was 5/6. And that might look like a very, very strange fraction. But if you would just remember that 3/6 and 2/6 equal, 5/6, right? Well, what is 3/6? Isn't that 1/2 or 50%? What is 2/6? 2/6 is the same as 1/3 or 33 1/3. So this really, boys and girls, is 50% and 33 1/3%. When you look at it that way, you're like, oh, that's not very hard to add. Oh yeah, that can be done in your head. 83 1/3%. Those two, I promise you, these two will be the tough ones to remember. So last night we left off at 1/8 was equal to 12.5%. So let's make sure and take a look at that. It was right here, right? 1/8 was 12.5%. And then where I left off was that 3/8 was a 12.5, a 12.5, and another 12.5, or 2/8 and another 1/8. All together make 37.5%. So there we have to add that, don't we? 37.5%, and that's equal to 3/8. Okay, so where did 2/8 goes? Oh, 2/8 was, we didn't add that up here. Let's go ahead and add that. 2/8 was the same as 1/4. Let's take a look at it. Right, I'm talking about right here. Isn't this my 2/8? And isn't that the same as 1/4? Okay, it's more pieces, but the pieces are smaller, right? Okay, here's my 3/8. 4/8, where's 4/8? Can you guess? 4/8 is right there. Yeah, it's equal to 1/2. 5/8. Okay, so if 4/8 is 1/2 or 50%, and 5/8 is 1/8 more, do you agree that I would add 12.5% to it, because 12.5% is the value of 1/8? Let me write that down. So this was 4/8 plus 1/8. Do I know the percent for 4/8? 50%, right? Do I know the percent for 1/8? 12.5%. Together make 62.5%. Okay? And what about 7/8? Well, there's lots of ways. Oh, wait a minute. We forgot 6/8, didn't we? Ah, where's 6/8? We didn't write it down. Let's do it. 6/8. 6/8 is the same as 3/4. Let's take a look at why. If I were going to shade 6/8, this is 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, right? Wouldn't that be the same as 3/4 altogether. 3/4. Look, we have the same amount shaded up here, right? Just a different, it's a rotation. It's a rotation, right? Of the same 3/4 that we have here. Okay, so it's doubled 3/8, isn't it? I'm sorry, it's doubled 3/8. So here's 3/8, another 3/8 is 6/8. Together make 6/8 or 3/4. Okay, so what else have we added? We've added the tenths. So 7/8. Oh, so 7/8 would be 1/8 more than the 75%, right? So it would be 75% and another 12.5%, right? Because this is 6/8 and this is 1/8, right? 6/8 and 1/8. So it's 87.5%. Now, I know that this is hard for you, trust me, and the only way you're going to get good at it is if you practice it, if this doesn't make quite sense to you. Okay, we're going to keep talking about it over the course of time. And then, of course, in red is what you probably did at teacher table today. Let's go ahead and add in the 5/8. If you know that 4/8 is 50%, another 12.5% would be what? 62.5%. What's another name for 6/8? Do you know it? 6/8, wasn't that the same as 3/4? So isn't this 75%? And then 7/8 was another 12.5% on top of that, right? And so this was 87.5%. We just talked about that, didn't we? Okay, so today's lesson, boys and girls, is how do you know when a fraction is equivalent to 1/2? If you take a look, we have this fraction, we had that, we had this one, we had this one, and we had this one. How did you know those fractions are equivalent to 1/2? Or, furthermore, how did you know that all these fractions were equivalent to 1/2? Okay? Hopefully you are saying that when the numerator, let's go ahead and jot this down. When the numerator is what? How is it going to compare to the denominator? I'm hoping that you're saying half is half of the denominator. When the numerator is half of the denominator, it is equal to 1/2. Okay, so if we were going to give some examples, right, we could just make sure that the numerator is half of the denominator, right? So if I did some examples, you know, they don't have to be mine, but I mean, if you did, you know, 5, the denominator would need to be 10, right? 5 is half of 10. If I did 60, what would the denominator have to be? It would have to be 120, right? Because 60 has to be half of 120. What am I doing really fast? I'm doubling the numerator, right? That's opposite of it. Opposite of it. Okay. So I think y'all get that. I know that you've been learning that since kindergarten, okay? What we have trouble with is how do we know when it's less than 1/2? Less than 1/2. Whoops. Okay, that's what we want to talk about next. Less than 1/2. Well, if you already know that a fraction is equal to 1/2, think about how you would know when a fraction is less than 1/2. For example, if I drew a box, if I can find my shape, there we go. If I drew a box and let's say I wanted to cut these into, oh, I'm going to cut it into 8 equal pieces. Okay, so there's 4 going that way, and we're going to put 2 going this way. Okay, so you agree that 4 out of these 8 are half, right? So how do I know that 3 out of 8 is less than 1/2? You can see it in the picture, right? Visually, you can see 3 out of the 8 pieces is less than 1/2. But how do you know that? What if I didn't want to draw a picture? What can we do with our numerator and denominator? What do you notice about 3 when I compare it to 8? What's my halfway point for 8? You're going to hear me talk about it as a benchmark. What's my benchmark for 8s? Which means, what's my halfway mark for 8s? Wouldn't it be 4 8s? Well, if I know that my halfway benchmark, that's what I'm going to call it, if my halfway benchmark is 4 8s, what would 3 8s be? And hopefully you're out there saying, oh, well, Mrs. Anglade, that would be half of it, right? So let's say this. We know that it's less than 1/2 if the numerator is less than half of the denominator. Okay? So let's give some examples. Okay. So let's see. Let's choose a denominator of 12. Let's start there. So 12. What's my halfway benchmark for 12? 6, right? So I want you to tell me a fraction that would be smaller than 1/2, i.e. 6/12. So it's less than that. So it could be 5/12, right? Could it be 4/12, 3/12, 2/12? 1/12. All of those fractions would be less than 1/2. Okay, let's try another denominator. What about 20? What's my halfway benchmark for 20? 10, right? And so what numerators could I get for less than 1/2? 9, 8, 7. Is that less than 1/2? Right. Let's do one more. Let's do a tricky one. 7. Ooh! 7. What are we going to do with 7? You're like, Mrs. Anglade, you can't take half of that. Yeah. It is an odd number. But we could just kind of keep in our head that 7, half of 7, really, do you agree, is 3.5? Do you agree with that? Like, it divides by 2 3 times, and then I kind of have half of it left, 3.5. Hopefully you're out there going, yeah, that kind of makes that sense, 3.5 and 3.5. So would 3/7 be less than? Would 2/7? Would 1/7? And so on. Okay. How about more than 1/2? More than 1/2 or greater than 1/2? What do you think? If this definition was the numerator is less than half of the denominator, I want you to write down the numerator is what while I'm going to draw another picture and I'm going to show it to you. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this real quickly. So go ahead and write down what you think the answer is. Okay, so you're writing down. Let's see if I can get this copied. There we go. There we go. Okay, so I have 8. I'm going to take it one at a time. I might as well just have redrawn it, huh? Okay, real quickly, I'm going to redraw this again. Okay. Okay, so I have 8 pieces, right? So how do I know that when I have a fraction like 5/8, right? 5/8, how do I know that that's more than? So over here, you should be writing a definition. So do that right now, because I'm going to write it in after I paused it, okay? Okay, guys, so hopefully you wrote down that the numerator is more than half of the denominator. So I'm going to take the same exact denominators, and I want you to write numerators so that it's more than. So remember, the halfway benchmark for 12 was 6. So could we say 8, 7, 9, 10, 11? What about 20? If the halfway benchmark is 10, could we say 11, 12, 13, 14? What about 7? 3.5. So could it be 4, 5, 6, 7? Here's what I want you to do. On the next page, this page, I have these 6 fractions. I want you to write down whether it's less than, greater than, or equal on these. So write these down in your journal, and I'll be right back with your answers. All right, guys, I'm back. So you can see my answers, and so I'm going to run out of time. So what Mrs. Scalata and I will do is we will go over these answers and make sure you understand this lesson for today. See you later.